Hey, we are doing the Haftarah for the Torah portion Bereshit. Now, I think it's ideal if you would go ahead and read Isaiah 42, starting in verse 5, all the way through chapter 43, verse 10, and then come back for this video, okay? Now, I got to tell you, I don't know what I was thinking when I first started sort of conceiving of how I was going to be doing these Haftorah lessons, because I actually thought that I was going to cover all of the Haftorah, at least in summary form, for each weekly lesson. And turns out that was ignorant. There's just too much to cover. I mean, of course there's too much to cover. It's God's Word, right? And that means that there's many layers and many facets to it. So already in this very first Haftorah, I'm completely blown away by what's in here. So what I've done is I've just sort of picked out a couple of things that stood out to me to put in this lesson. Next year, I can learn more layers, right? Next year, you can learn more layers. That's why we read and we study every year, because there's always going to be more to learn. And I think we need to be maybe reminded of that. I know I needed to be reminded of that. It's like it's our lifetime intertwining of ourselves with God and with His Word, and living that out, that brings us progress as believers. It's not so much how much head knowledge that we master at any given time. So that's a good reminder for me. You might need that reminder too. Okay, let's dig in. So in the Torah portion for Bereshit, we have the very first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And there is such significance to those words. You may have heard of the famous Torah scholar Rashi. He says that starting out Torah that way is like a defense for the Jewish claim to the land of Israel. And he says that, if the nations were to come to Israel and say, "You're thieves, you've conquered the land that used to belong to the seven nations," well, then Israel can answer back, "The entire world belongs to God because He created it. And He chose to give it to them first, then He chose to take it away from them and give it to us, Israel, in a perpetual covenant." Well, Isaiah, in this Haftorah, in the very first lines that he has, he kind of harkens back to the creation in those first verses of chapter 42. So chapter 42 verse 5 starts out this way. It says, "Thus says the Lord God, who creates the heavens and stretches them out, who spreads forth the earth and that which comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk on it." So Isaiah introduces this prophecy that he's about to give us, and he introduces it by describing God as the creator of heaven and earth. And of course, this affirms God's sovereignty over the universe and all who live in it and everything in it, right? So Isaiah is reminding us that God is not just the God of Israel, but He's the God of all creation. And we servants are ministers to all nations. Now, something that I never noticed before, and in some versions it doesn't say it in the present tense, but in the original Hebrew it's in present tense. So it's the Lord who creates, the one who spreads out the land, the one who gives breath. Okay? So what's that saying? It's saying that creation isn't a one-time thing. God didn't set it up and then go take a nap somewhere. Creation is a constant, ongoing process. God renews his goodness every day, always the work of creation. So in this Haftarah, Isaiah is telling us that the people of Israel, and that's you and me who are grafted in, that we've been given a very special mission by this same God of creation. He created everything, and he gets to decide what the mission of his creation is. So if the world was created by accident, then creation and the created, or the everything, right, has no inherent purpose. But if God did, that's different, right? If creation was created by like a committee of gods, well, then we have to answer to each of them. But, says the opening lines of Genesis, but, says Isaiah in this Haftarah, since there is one God who created the world and he called it good, then we're responsible to him, in him alone. He determines your purpose. Okay? Not society, not your peers, not your in-laws. God alone determines your purpose. Now let that sink into your soul. This Haftarah even ends with a powerful description of the covenant relationship between God and us. In the last sentence in this Haftarah, which is chapter 43:10, he says this: "You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant who I have chosen, so that you know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, nor after me there is none." So you and I have been tasked with the mission of testifying to all humanity that God is the only creator and the only source of power in the universe. So testifying to all humanity, for us, that would mean those in our sphere of influence. We have a duty to witness to God's definition of good and evil. All right, so how can we do that in a practical way? I'm gonna give you one way. Think about the Sabbath, and think about how Sabbath is tied into the creation account. Okay, God made the world in 6 days, and then he rested, which Hebraically to rest means that he, as the king, is on the throne, and there are no other rivals, right? So guarding Shabbat, that doesn't mean do things perfectly, but guarding its intent. That means proclaiming that our King has no rival. By guarding Sabbath, you are signaling that you accept the fact that God is behind the creative process in creation. That's how you bear witness. When you say a blessing on Friday evening with a cup of wine, you stand, because it's in standing that you bear witness. Yes, if you can invite others to join you on the occasional Friday evening, that's fantastic. And I recommend you do that if possible. And it's wonderful if you have family that can join in every week or even occasionally, right? But if you are a family of one, either in number or because you're the only one who's guarding Sabbath, I want you to know this. You can set your intention, not your spouse's, not your children's, not anybody else. Set your intention every week to guard the Sabbath, even if you do it alone. Because in reality, you're not alone. God is with you, and so is the host of heaven, who will see you stand as a witness. So don't discount the impact that you setting your intention to guard Sabbath can have both in the heavenlies and on earth. His Hebrew name is Yeshayahu. We call him Isaiah. Now, I don't know where I used to think that he lived. I think maybe in my mind I thought he lived in the desert or the wilderness like John the Baptist. But I learned that Isaiah lived in Jerusalem. He lived in the days of several kings like Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and maybe even into the days of King Manasseh, which, if so, that means that Isaiah would have been prophesying for like 50 years or so. He's the one that God asked, "Who shall I send and who shall go for us?" He's the one that answered that famous answer, "Hineni, here I am, send me." I want a heart like Isaiah. Here I am, send me. It's a little scary too. Now, being God's prophet for like some 50 years, you can imagine that Isaiah saw both Israel's fortune and misfortune many, many times, right? And there were times that the nation prospered on the outside, but Isaiah was able to see the inner corruption of the soul of the people. And he then spoke openly about it. So starting in chapter 40 of Isaiah, Isaiah's words record a series of consolations and a messianic hope of renewal for the faithful remnant. But he also predicted the Babylonian exile that actually happened like 100 years after his death. And he also saw beyond the exile to the future return from Babylon and the rebuilding of the temple, in the days of Cyrus. But he also saw farther into the future, which is our future, into the days when God would restore the Davidic kingdom that's split in two. He saw into the messianic kingdom of peace. I found Yeshua in this Haftarah. I'm so excited. Yeah, I know. He's all over the scriptures. I mean, Yeshua himself said as much, right? But Isaiah 41 through 53 mentions this character called the servant of the Lord. I don't know that I realized before this that there's like a big controversy among Christians and Judaism as to who this servant of the Lord is. The Jews say that it's the collective people of Israel, and Christians say it's Messiah, namely Yeshua. So I think it's actually both. Yeshua as Messiah, of course, he is the ultimate Israelite. He's the promised seed of Abraham, and he's the fulfillment of Israel's divine purpose, right? So Messiah represents all Israel, and he certainly will represent all Israel as the king at his return. I also found that there's this Aramaic paraphrase of Isaiah. It's known as the Targum Yonatan that actually identifies this servant of the Lord with Messiah. So I thought that was kind of cool. But, of course, the people of God are witnesses and ambassadors to the Lord. So we can see both aspects of the servant of the Lord being both the people of Israel and then ultimately Messiah. And where I had read earlier, Isaiah 42:6, that certainly, and when we talked about it before, we were talking about it as how it applies to us as the people of God, but it can also certainly be attributed to Messiah himself. So let me read that again. Isaiah 42:6. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will strengthen your hand and guard you, and give you for a covenant to a people, a light to the nations. Okay? Or a light to the Gentiles, the nations. So Messiah is he's a covenant for the people, right? We know he's the mediator of that renewed covenant that's spoken of by Jeremiah. He's the light to the ultimate light to the nations, the light of men, the light that shines in darkness. And Yeshua himself, said he is the light of the world. In the world to come, he will be the menorah that's in the midst of New Jerusalem, that light to the nations. And in Revelation 21:4, it says the nations will walk in its light. So Isaiah 42:7 says this, to open blind eyes. This is talking about the servant of the Lord. To open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the prison, those who sit in darkness from the prison house. Now, the blind and those who are imprisoned, those are of the nation of Israel that Isaiah is talking to, the ones that have strayed. But they can also refer to the heathen and the pagan nations living in idolatry. So Messiah comes to them, the servant of the Lord, comes to them as a light. Now, it's not just for physical health of those that Yeshua healed when he restored blindness. It was also kind of like his messianic calling card that said he was the one who would restore spiritual blindness to the truth of Torah. I want you to continue reading in this Haftarah about what the servant of the Lord does. Take notes on it. Look back in the context where it starts. Take notes on the things that the servant of the Lord does. And then on your own, I want you to make notes about how that lines up with what we know about Yeshua in the gospel accounts of his ministry. There's a lot in there, and it's going to be a really, really interesting study for you if you do it. So that's what I have for this Haftarah that goes along with Bereshit. And I will see you next time in the Parsha called Noah. And I can't wait.